If you didn't watch part 1 of this video, don't worry. It really doesn't matter which order you watch these in. Alright, if you thought that part 1 looked like a Rate Your Music chart, just wait until you see the picks that we have lined up for this video. Quick recap of the rules here. I try to stick with one album per artist, but there's exceptions to that. We'll start this off with the good old Nujabes, okay? Modal Soul by Nujabes. This is one of my favorite albums to put on to start my day off. You know, whenever I listen to this thing the first thing in the morning, if I'm like showering, getting ready, eating breakfast, I just have the greatest day ever. It is such a peaceful record. I love the whole kind of smooth jazz piano samples that are going on in here. There's a lot of great guest vocalists on this record. This album makes me feel so in the moment. Feather is one of my favorite songs to play in the shower. Fun fact. Pause by Four Tet. Here's a fun fact, okay? Fun fact for you guys. Probably about half the videos on this channel were edited while I was listening to Pause. This album is my second favorite Four Tet album. I think this is an album that kind of gets overshadowed by Rounds, which is kind of unfortunate because I like this album a lot better than Rounds. I don't know why, but like throwing on this album just really just gets me in the zone to just work and get shit done. But also, if I wanted to listen to it just to listen to it, then I can do that and I can still enjoy my time with the album. New Long Leg by Dry Cleaning. This is an album that came out a couple years ago. It was one of my favorite albums of 2021. Ever since then, it's really just kind of kept growing on me and growing on me even more and more. This album's just a fun time all around. I love the vocal style of this album. This is like a post-punk type beat thing, but the vocal style is really unique, at least to me. This kind of like talk singing vibe. Some fun lyrics in there as well, you know. Sausages. Gets me every time. Every time this lady says sausages. Gets me every time. Lonesome Crowded West by Modest Mouse. Definitely the best Modest Mouse album. One of my favorite albums of all time, obviously. But I'd say this is probably like a top 10 album. This is an album that really transformed my music taste to what it is today. Some of the best lyrics ever on any album. I love the lyrical style that Isaac Brock has, especially in his earlier albums. Great tracks on this thing, front to back, no skips, all killer, no filler. I don't really need to say much about this album because a lot of people have already heard it, and it's just a fantastic record. A record that's kind of similar, but not exactly similar to Lonesome Crowded West. We got Built to Spill, Perfect From Now On. This is another album that kind of developed my music taste a lot. I listened to Lonesome Crowded West and Perfect From Now On around the same time in my life. Yeah, no, this album also kind of helped develop my music taste into what it is today. It really got me into music itself and kind of showed me how emotional music can be and how music can affect me as a person. Both these albums did. Modest Mouse in general and Built to Spill in general did. Of Schlegenheim by Black Midi. If you're a fan of the channel, this will not be a shock to you. This is the best Black Midi album. I was thinking about it recently about why I think this album is so much better than their other records in my opinion. And I think it's because I listened to this at a time where like this was like the most chaotic piece of music I've listened to. And I didn't really necessarily get it at first. Like it kind of took me probably about a year until I was like, okay, this shit slaps. I still just think it's better than Cavalcade and better than Hellfire because I think the compositions are better like in general. I think this album shows a side of Black Midi that I guess they kind of matured past with their later work. I guess we'll talk about another debut that I think is better than the later work. For the first time, Black Country New Road. Black Country New Road kind of has a certain vibe in their debut that they kind of evolved past. While Ants From Up There is good and the compositions are great and the lyrics are great, you kind of get all that, like good compositions, good lyrics in their debut, but it's just less funeral vibes by Arcade Fire. I guess more Slint vibes, but even then I feel like this album has its own identity, and that's why it's one of my favorite albums of all time. Since I Left You by The Avalanches, bro, this album is one of the best albums of all time, objectively. For those of you who don't know, let me mansplain for you. This record was made entirely only using samples, meaning every single thing that you've heard in this album is recorded by another musician that somebody found and compiled into this beautiful collage of sound. Definitely the most impressive musical project I've ever heard in my entire life. Similar to like I said about the books, where the books kind of opened my mind about samples, and then this album kind of showed me how far you could really take it. I'm also going to talk about Wildflower. This is where kind of the one album per artist rule gets a little dodgy. Wildflower is just an extremely important album in my life. I've talked about this album in my summer albums video, and I kind of talked about my memories associated with this album, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but just know that this album is just as good as Since I Left You. Cola by A Beacon School. This is another one that I talked about in my summer albums video, so I don't want to go too deep into it. I will say This is one of the prettiest albums that I've heard ever. Kind of indie bedroom rock, pop rock type of deal, but the compositions are just absolutely incredible. Highly recommend this project. If you want to hear me talk more about it, then watch my summer albums video. Underscore by Group Eno. This record is just straight up fun. I don't even know how I found this thing, but I found it so long ago and I've been vibing with it ever since. There's almost kind of these like hip hop influences within the record, but there's also very like poppy as well. A lot of bright synths and stuff. There's a lot of fantastic production techniques in this record. Some of these vocal chops that are happening in this record absolutely blow me away. I will never not have a good time while listening to this record. Deltron 3030 by Deltron 3030. This is a kind of a similar vibe to Mad Villain, where it's like I listened to this thing and it kind of just broadened my scope of what rap could be even more so. It's so cool, dude. It has such a interesting like cohesive story. Like it's all about like kind of the future and shit like that, and there's like just some interesting shit going on in the lyrics. The instrumentation is fantastic. It sounds super grand and super epic. I would probably say this is like the Illinois of rap, okay? You know how people say like because of the internet it's like the OK Computer of rap music? Deltron 3030, Illinois rap music. I'm gonna say that. Cross by Justice. This is the best Daft Punk album. This record is super sick. I think it takes everything that Daft Punk does really well and they just kind of turn it up like to a 10, honestly. This album definitely does have his own identity outside of being a Daft Punk clone. The wubs, bro. There's a lot of fantastic wubs on this thing. Genesis is probably one of the coolest album openers I've ever heard in my life, especially in an electronic album. This is one of the best electronic albums of all time. Feels by Animal Collective. Yeah, no, Animal Collective is my favorite band of all time. This is not a surprise. So honestly, any Animal Collective album could be put on this list and I would be okay with it. Yes, even Painting With. Underrated album, by the way. If I had to choose, gun to my head, then Feels would be my favorite record by the band. This album just kind of makes me nostalgic for a childhood that I never lived, which is kind of sad. I feel like this is Animal Collective's like most like emotional feeling album, and I think because of that I just kind of resonate with this record a lot. By the way, I will be making an Animal Collective documentary. More on that later. I'll upload a video about it later. Spiderland by Slint. I've talked about this album a good amount of times on this channel. This is just another one of those albums where every single time I kind of go back to it, I just fall in love with it more and more. First time I heard this thing was way back in like my freshman year of high school, and I kind of didn't really get it, but it kind of, as I've matured and as I've grown up and my music taste has developed more and more, I've just kind of enjoyed this thing more and more every single time I listen to it. The fact that there's only one track on this thing that I don't necessarily vibe with, and this album is still on this list, kind of just shows how good the other tracks on this album were. Talk Talk, Laughing Stock. This is a really sick album. This is a really unique album. It's a very jazzy influenced post rock album. Yeah, listening to this thing is just a fantastic time. Love the compositions on this thing. This is an album that I think everyone should check out. It's a great album to just kind of just chill out and listen to it, you know? You just really encapsulate the music in your brain and I feel like sometimes I just say things and I just don't know what they mean. Pink Flag by Wire. I think it's kind of weird because I kind of think this is like the same vibe as 1039 Smooth Out Slappy Hours by Green Day, which doesn't really make sense, but let me explain. Hear me out. This album is just like kind of the guys jamming, you know? There's a lot of fun fucking tracks on this thing. The album's like 20 songs long, but the album runtime is only like 34 minutes. So like there's so many songs on this thing that are just like less than a minute long. Every single track is fun, all killer, no filler. The tracks that do feel short, I wish were longer, and the tracks that are longer, I wish were longer. Super fun album to sing along to too. Cheers Missing is a good album too, but Pink Flag is a very easy album for me to come back to and listen to and have a good time too. Oh yeah, we got the holy trinity of Radiohead, you know, OK Computer, Kid A, and Rainbows. Radiohead is another band that really kind of changed my life in terms of like what music I listen to and like really helped develop my music taste. These three albums I think are objectively their best albums. I think in my tier list video I said some like wacky shit. Honestly, you can't trust me from 2 years ago, dude. Like my music opinions change so much within even just a month, you know? Like you can't trust this guy, okay? Honestly, every Radiohead album is fantastic. One of the best bands of all time. Run the Jewels 2 by Run the Jewels. This album was the first Run the Jewels album I listened to, and it sent me down this whole spiral of a rabbit hole of listening to every single Run the Jewels album, listening to every fucking LP produced album, listening to a bunch of like abstract hip hop, and stuff like that. Like a lot of the rap albums on this list, it just feels super unique because I just don't hear a lot of rap that sounds like this album. For a good fucking like 2-3 months of my life, I was in this rabbit hole of listening to Run the Jewels and a bunch of Run the Jewels associated acts. Fantastic Damage, by the way, great album. 2012-2017 by Against All Logic. This is another electronic album. This is Nicholas Jar's like kind of side project, by the way, if you know who that is. I have trouble picking which of the two albums I like the most, and I think I've kind of officially settled on 2012 through 2017, and it's definitely because they took off You Fantasy on streaming. This is one of the coolest kind of electronic albums that I've heard, IDM type thing. I Never Dream is one of my favorite songs of all time. The vocal chops on that is just so insane. Like, those vocal samples are so fucking insane, dude. I guess in a technical aspect, his second album is like better, but something about the compositions of the first album really just makes me go back to it a whole lot. Gio Gotti by Boards of Canada. This is on par with Music Has Right to Children. Honestly, can't decide which one I like more because they're both really good and they both each have their own unique vibe. It's a lot more darker than Music Has Right to Children, to be honest. I still remember my first time listening to Don Chorus, bro. Like, when I was listening to Don Chorus, literally, I had to stop everything I was doing and I was just like totally immersed in the music. It was actually a crazy experience. This album's really good. London Calling by The Clash, great album. I think it's really cool how these guys fit so many musical styles in just one album. It's kind of really interesting, especially for the 70s. Like, kind of every single song really just feels like it's a different type of genre or style. This album never gets boring throughout the entire 1 hour long runtime, and it's literally each track back to back to back to back is really good. Super fun album to listen to. A lot of bangers on this thing. Emotion by Carly Rae Jepsen. I said in a video once, I was like, because it was like a list of like a Pitchfork list of like top 200 albums of all time. Emotion was on there, and I was like, the Call Me Maybe Girl? What? And then everyone's like, bro, no, listen to Emotion. And when I listen to Emotion, this is the best pop album I've ever heard in my life. I don't listen to a lot of pop, but this album is so incredible. Like, honestly, the production on it alone makes this album worth it. And of course, Carly has some amazing vocal performances on here, some amazing melodies on here, great lyrics on here as well. I will never fail to have a great time while listening to this album. I'm proud to admit that Carly has evolved past the Call Me Maybe Girl to me. I'll Try Living Like This by Death's Dynamic Shroud. This album is just a super unique vibe. I don't listen to Vaporwave, but this album is just really interesting to me. I think the sampling techniques alone on this record are really cool. Like, a lot of just like the time stretching and the time warping and whatever is going on in here. Really sick vibe. This album is super fun to listen to if you're driving around at night. This album is honestly just an album that you should listen to at night. Sound of Silver by LCD Sound System. There was a time in my life where my dad made me work out in the yard breaking rocks all summer long. I was a child. It was child labor, but we loved the guy. When I was out there in the heat of the sun breaking rocks, the only thing that kept me sane was LCD Sound System. This album wasn't originally on this list until I listened to it again, and then I was reminded of how good this album actually is. The memory of it just keeping me sane during the summer where I had to break rocks and dig holes all summer long. It's just a memory that I will keep close to my heart because honestly, if I did not have LCD Sound System, I would not have made it. And then the last album we're going to talk about today is Sleep Cycle by Deacon. Deacon is a member of Animal Collective. He's a member of Animal Collective that I always kind of never really paid too much attention to while listening to the Animal Collective discography. Listening to Sleep Cycle really kind of showed me how talented this man actually is. This album is really good. I listened to this album a lot when I was in Portland, so I associate this album a lot when I was in Portland. Portland was a great time in my life because it was my first time living out on my own, and this was an album that I discovered like kind of when I first moved out there. The album opener and the album closer are both really good, and everything in between that is really good as well. Great melodies on this thing too. I really hope one day we get another Deacon solo album because I just love this thing. Also, thank you, I forgot whoever did it, but whoever reminded me about this album in the comments in the last video, I appreciate you because it made me re-listen to this album and realize how good this album actually is. Well, I always knew that this album was good, but it reminded me of how good this album actually is. So there we go. That's my favorite albums of all time list. We'll see how this holds up in a year because like I said, you can't trust me. Thank you for watching, and yeah, dude.